Hello and welcome to this tutorial on how we paint a drop pod. More specifically, how you go about weathering it to make it look like it's been affected by atmospheric re-entry. Really nice scorch marks, burn marks, etc. Now, to foreground the miniature, we do want to achieve a chipping effect. I did say drop pod, you did not mishear me. The video that concerned itself with the chipping area, the chipping portion of it, it was corrupted all to hell, all out of focus, unusable. So I'm giving you a bit of a sneak preview of an upcoming video tutorial on Okay, I can announce it now. So there will be a heavy weathering tutorial coming in the new year, concentrating on chipping techniques. Specifically, the reason why is that I want it in 4K. I want to update older videos, and a heavy weathering tutorial I think will be right up people's alleys, as well as all brand new courses coming up. But I'll leave that there for now. Okay, so you foreground the miniature by airbrushing on top of a black base coat with brown leather, and then you use an airbrush with Troll Slayer Orange loaded up inside it, and you can load up a brush full of Troll Slayer Orange, wet it ever so slightly, and you can push air through the airbrush to create a splatter effect. Now this is done across the entirety of the drop pod before we add a layer of either heavy chipping fluid by AK Interactive or, my preferred method, hairspray. The reason being is that this layer is the rust / dented layer, the underlying layers beneath the red. Now the reason why we're using this on top of a black base coat is that the brown leather and the Troll Slayer Orange will blend right the way back into that black. So when we come to highlight it, when we come to add the vibrant red on top and scratch it off, you can see the underlying layers are quite a bit darker and they give much more contrast. Okay, a heavy application of heavy chipping fluid or hairspray is applied. The stronger the hairspray, the better. Black is reapplied across the entirety of the miniature. In this case, I used the Strillex. I'm terrible at pronouncing that. It's the Badger Black Airbrush primer. Across the entire thing, then Medea Comet White, what other white would you use through an airbrush, is applied to create the pre-shade. A good pre-shade layer goes a long way. Please take note of the areas I am hitting with the airbrush, specifically the sides and the middle section. Now, the middle section that has been masked off, there is a video tutorial up already on how I created the black marble effect. That's available for you to view right now. And I haven't included it here for the sake of repetition and the sake of brevity, being the soul of wit and all. This video is 18 minutes long. I'm not sure you can exactly call that short or brief. Now that the pre-shade has been complete, we can add some colour. Antares Red is thinned down with Life Colour Thinner and applied across the entirety of the red armour plate. Now the consistency of this paint, I dread to say this, but it's around the consistency of skimmed milk. What exactly does that mean? Well, we need it dilute enough that it runs through the airbrush without any interruption. You don't hear any sputtering and you don't feel like there's any clogs. If you're unsure of this consistency, over thin it and keep adding pigment to it. We are roughly looking for around 1 part thinner to 2 parts paint. That will give roughly the consistency we are looking for with this mixture. Hot orange is then applied through the central portions. Indeed, it overlaps any white areas that we can see poking through. You can see that the hot orange is a very highly densely pigmented colour and it has beautiful application, has a beautiful coverage. Apply to the struts. The actual painting of the red will be rather simple in comparison to our infantry marines. When applying them to vehicles, especially ones that we will be heavily weathering. We don't need to be too specific, or rather we don't need to embellish it too much with brushwork. Instead, we want to work in generalities, general tones that we can build up the realism through and the detailing through the weathering stages. So unlike the infantry tutorials we've built up so far, we won't be overlapping this much and developing the tones overly. But it is essential we keep a good contrast to the piece, and what would a Blood Angel army be without a good strong dose of orange? If you are viewing this and you don't really know what that means, well, the Blood Angels back in the 90s, they used to have more of an orange tint to their armour rather than the updated Mephiston red look to them. So older gamers, we always joke that Blood Angel... I mean, there used to be a colour called Blood Angels Orange in the collection. Wonderful colour, reminiscent of hot orange. Okay, I'm prattling on. Next up, we mix in a tiny amount of Sunny Skin Tone into the mixture to give a salmon-like appearance. The previous mixture, Hot Orange, we are looking at maybe 80% Hot Orange, 20% Sunny Skin Tone. There or thereabouts. Miniature painting, especially the way I approach it, I don't rely too much on exacting recipes. I don't use pipettes. I very much trust my own eye. It's the way I like working. I know it's not everybody's favoured way of working, but you can see the tones that I've created on the video in front of you. And when we apply this onto the miniature, it should cover up the highlights that we've built up with the initial tones with the white. Okay, finally we add a small amount of opaque white. This stuff is very strong, so 90% previous mixture of Sunny Skin Tone and Hot Orange, and 10% opaque white. This overlaps the very strongest portions of the highlight, and it will give this a salmon-like appearance. Don't worry, we need to push the contrast now, so we can bring it back with our Daler Rowney Crimson ink. This is added with thinner to around 50-50 mixture. When it's applied, it's a very thin application. It's not highly pigmented whatsoever. Okay, Hot Orange is added into the airbrush and mixed with 50% thinner, and this is glazed over the mid-tone to highlight to warm things up ever so slightly. You can see I've left a touch of that white right up in the top highlights. Violet ink finishes off the armor plate, and this is again mixed with 50-50 thinner. Violet ink is used with 50-50 thinner to overlap in the shadows to peak the contrast between the two. And that is it for the red armor plate. If you would like further videos on the subject, there's a Raldron tutorial, a Blood Angels Legion Champion tutorial, as well as an infantry and a tank. We have a lot of videos on the Blood Angels on the Patreon at the moment, as well as this drop pod now about to launch. Next up, we need to take some warm water, pop it in the airbrush after you've given it a thorough clean. Make sure you look after your airbrush and it will look after you. Okay, now we have our warm water loaded. It's very important it needs to be warm. Loaded up into our airbrush, we apply it across the entirety of the armoured plate that we want to strip. The warm water will start to eat into the paint and sink right the way through into the underlying layer beyond the hairspray. We take a stiffed bristle brush. So these are the brushes that come when you buy an airbrush set. They're the cleaning keys. I found this is the perfect consistency to give some really effective battle damage. I'm trying to keep the strokes as consistent as possible to represent re-entry damage. So strictly up and down. I may change it when it comes to the sides of the vehicle to pick up on any extra details. if the paint, you can add a few scratches here and there where bullets have ricocheted off it using the tip of a knife. The more hairspray that you use in the initial layer, the more will strip off at this point. I find hairspray, the maximum hold stuff that you can get, 2 to 3 layers is optimal. Please try it on a spare piece of resin before you dive straight into your expensive drop pod model. I'm very experienced with this, I know the materials. If you can't find a hairspray that works for you, I can't believe I'm giving hairspray tips on this show. Have a look at a thing called heavy chipping fluid, which is made by AK Interactive. It's the same principles, only you can get it everywhere, and you don't have to worry about individual manufacturers or what kind of hairspray constitutes a stronghold or any of that nonsense. You can just dive straight in, get used to using it, and use it on your miniatures. Now, I modulate the strength of which I'm applying this onto the miniature. I'll use the the brush very roughly in places, especially on the edges. But then in the middle sections here, I want to just gently roll it across. More damage will accrue on the harder edges of the vehicle. The same detailing is applied to the struts, and you'll notice keen observers will have noted that this isn't fully assembled. I've painted them separately. Yep, I know, hard to believe. But I found this to be much easier. This is the updated Dreadnought drop pod, by the way. The struts are so much easier to put. The entire thing is just a delight to put together and to paint. So if you're on the fence about buying the new one after hearing horror stories of the last one, or if you've experienced the horror that was the last Dreadnought drop pod, my god. Rest assured, the new one is much more pleasurable to put together. Then we finish off the process by adding a pin wash using black oil, so lamp black, across all the metallic areas. That's been given a wash of jet exhaust by Vallejo. We allow that to set, and we'll get on to atmospheric weathering in part 2. Catch you soon. We'll catch you tomorrow. Bye-bye.